and he snapped. And he pushed me to the floor.
He knocked you over?
He knocked me over. I landed on the dog bowl.
You cut your back?
Yeah, I cut my back. I didn't know about it at the time.
Prince Harry tried to rewrite the Queen's will, and now he's been cut off for good. In a stunning turn of events, Prince William has broken his silence, revealing that his younger brother, Prince Harry, attempted to manipulate palace staff and royal legal advisors, pressuring them to alter Queen Elizabeth's final wishes in his favor. According to royal insiders, Harry wasn't just chasing a bigger piece of the inheritance, he was quietly angling for influence over the royal succession itself. Now, the fallout is explosive. Sources claim King Charles backed William's move to formally shut Harry out, both financially and institutionally. What exactly did Harry say behind palace walls? And how close did he come to rewriting royal history? The answers will shock you. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It was supposed to be just another quiet morning behind the grand gates of Windsor, where tradition, protocol, and centuries-old lineage have shaped the lives of Britain's royal family. But what emerged from the depths of royal secrecy was not the serene image of a family bound by duty, but something far more unsettling, a revelation so explosive it threatened to shatter the very core of the monarchy. The British public awoke to a media frenzy, fueled by a bombshell that no one saw coming. Prince William had accused his younger brother, Prince Harry, of attempting to interfere with Queen Elizabeth II's final will and royal succession plans. The headline alone stunned royal watchers across the globe. Prince Harry kicked out of the royal family after Prince William reveals he tried to rewrite the Queen's final wishes. But behind that headline was a deeper story. One that stretched beyond sibling rivalry, beyond petty disputes, and into the high-stakes territory of power, inheritance, and legacy. The future of the monarchy, the last words of a dying queen, and the trust of a nation were all suddenly in question. The drama wasn't unfolding in a Netflix special or on the pages of a scandalous tabloid. It was erupting from within Buckingham Palace itself, carried out in hushed meetings, secret documents, and bitter confrontations. This wasn't just a royal family feud. This was a political chess game cloaked in tradition, where one move could alter the fate of the crown, and Prince William had just made the first decisive move by exposing what he claims were Harry's clandestine efforts to twist the Queen's will in his favor. Imagine it, a late-night meeting behind locked palace doors. Lawyers on edge. Royal aides glancing nervously over their shoulders. Papers spread out across a polished oak table bearing the seal of the crown. And in the center of it all, a desperate Prince Harry allegedly pressing senior staff and legal counsel to adjust the wording, the shares, the titles, the future. Not just for himself, but perhaps even for his children. This wasn't merely about money. It was about legacy, influence, and perhaps revenge. Now ask yourself, what would drive a prince, born into unimaginable privilege, to try and manipulate the last legal document of a sovereign who had given her life in service to duty and nation? What fractures had been deepened behind the palace walls? What truths had been hidden beneath the carefully curated facade of royal decorum? And more importantly, what happens next? This video will take you deep into the halls of power, peeling back the velvet curtain to reveal the intrigue, the betrayal, and the strategic power plays that led to one of the most dramatic royal ruptures in recent history. Over the next few minutes, you'll uncover the timeline of events, the inside sources, and the mounting evidence behind Prince William's shocking claims. You'll learn why this moment matters not just to the Windsors, but to the future of the British monarchy itself. But first, let's set the stage. For years, the British royal family has carefully balanced tradition with transition. The death of Queen Elizabeth II in 2022 marked the end of a defining era, one that symbolized continuity, stability, and grace under pressure. The Queen had seen wars, scandals, divorces, and revolutions, yet through it all, she had remained the symbolic anchor of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth. So when she passed, her will, both literal and symbolic, was expected to reflect the values she had held dear: fairness, duty, and loyalty to the institution she had served for more than 70 years. But according to new revelations, what occurred in the final weeks leading up to her death, and in the months that followed, was anything but smooth. Insiders now suggest that Prince Harry, whose dramatic exit from royal duties in 2020 shocked the establishment, made calculated efforts to influence the Queen's personal will and succession strategy in the months before her passing. According to Prince William's explosive disclosure, his brother was not merely trying to reconcile or seek forgiveness. He was allegedly lobbying palace staff and legal representatives in private, pushing for changes that would grant him and his family greater access to the Queen's personal fortune and possibly a more significant symbolic role in the post-Elizabeth era. What started as whispers among the Queen's most trusted aides has now emerged as a full-blown royal scandal. One top aide, whose identity remains shielded for legal reasons, reportedly expressed concern over the unusual pressure being applied by Harry during several private conversations. Another source with close ties to the royal legal team noted persistent, emotionally charged appeals from the Duke of Sussex, some of which took place via encrypted messaging apps and unrecorded video calls. The timing of these interactions, particularly during the Queen's deteriorating health, has raised serious ethical questions, not just among insiders, but now among the public. Prince William, always portrayed as the dutiful heir, the stabilizing force amid his brother's turbulence, had reportedly remained silent for months, possibly out of respect for his grandmother's memory, or perhaps in an effort to protect the crown from further chaos. But that silence broke recently in what has become the most explosive revelation of William's public life. In a rare private briefing with senior palace officials and advisors, details of which were later leaked to a trusted circle of journalists, Prince William did not mince words. He claimed that Harry's actions amounted to nothing short of interference, and that the integrity of the Queen's last wishes had been threatened by someone who had long distanced himself from royal duty, only to re-emerge when wealth and legacy were in play. The Queen's will, which had been kept largely private for security reasons, was suddenly under unprecedented scrutiny. Experts say that while certain elements, such as bequeathing jewelry to female heirs or splitting personal assets among grandchildren, were expected, there were signs that suggested potential tampering or at least attempts at influence in the lead-up to the will's final signing. In the weeks leading to her passing, the Queen had reportedly insisted on several key provisions. These included ensuring Prince William and Catherine would have enhanced roles in the Commonwealth, securing certain charitable trusts under William's oversight, and allocating personal items with sentimental value to members who had remained consistently loyal to the crown. But insiders say that Harry attempted to redirect some of those decisions, advocating, for example, for the inclusion of his daughter Lilibet in certain titles and trust arrangements, despite earlier agreements to step away from such privileges. For a monarchy already reeling from controversies surrounding Meghan Markle, the Netflix docuseries, and Harry's memoir Spare, this revelation came like a fresh wound. Trust within the royal circle, already strained, was now splintering. This was no longer just a family disagreement. It was a constitutional and moral crisis within the world's most famous monarchy. Prince Harry's bid to influence the Queen's final acts was not merely seen as selfish or inappropriate. It was now being characterized, in Prince William's own words, as deeply troubling and potentially harmful to the long-term stability of the crown. As media headlines around the globe exploded, with photos of a stern-faced Prince William and a distant, visibly distressed Prince Harry splashed across front pages, the public's mood shifted. Polls began to show a dramatic dip in favorability for the Duke of Sussex, while Prince William's popularity soared. The narrative had pivoted. Harry was no longer the rogue prince simply searching for peace in California. He was now cast as a shadowy figure maneuvering behind the scenes at the most sacred moment of his grandmother's legacy. As we begin to trace this shocking story from its origins to its far-reaching consequences, prepare yourself for a journey of secrets unearthed, loyalties betrayed, and the raw, unfiltered drama that only the House of Windsor can deliver. The question now is not just what Harry did, but why. Was it a last-ditch effort to reclaim relevance? A misguided attempt at justice? Or something more deliberate and self-serving? And what role did the Queen's staff, legal teams, and even King Charles play in navigating these turbulent waters? One thing is certain, the consequences have been seismic. Prince Harry, once seen as the charming, relatable younger royal, now stands on the precipice of complete exile. And as Prince William steps into his role not just as the heir, but as the protector of the monarchy's integrity, the battle lines have been drawn. Stay with us as we break down every piece of this explosive puzzle. From secret meetings to insider leaks, from succession strategy to the emotional toll on the royal family, we're diving into the most dramatic royal story of the decade. And it's only just begun. It started with whispers in the halls of Windsor Castle. A quiet exchange, a passing comment that should have stayed behind closed doors, but didn't. Now, those whispers have erupted into a full-blown royal firestorm. At the center, a grandmother's careless remark, a father's unrelenting fury, and a young girl unknowingly caught in the middle of a legacy far larger than herself. This isn't the fairy tale version of royal life you're used to hearing. This isn't about tiaras, palace balls, or perfect Christmas portraits on the palace lawn. This is about betrayal, about pride, about bloodline, power, and the invisible lines that divide us from them in a family that constantly projects unity while privately brimming with conflict. Welcome to the truth behind the latest drama in the House of Windsor, a drama that, according to insiders, could lead to one of the most seismic shifts in royal dynamics since the abdication of King Edward VIII. Prince William, the future King of England, has reportedly made a decision that stunned even the most seasoned royal observers. According to high-level leaks, he has ordered Queen Camilla, the wife of his father King Charles III, out of his immediate family's orbit after a private family disagreement escalated into something far more personal and far more disturbing. The spark? A comment allegedly made by Camilla, not about a political issue or palace operations, but about William's only daughter, Princess Charlotte. What could possibly drive Prince William to draw such a dramatic and public line in the sand? Why would he, a man often regarded as diplomatic and reserved, risk reigniting a decades-long powder keg of royal tension over a comment? And what exactly did Camilla say that was so offensive, so deeply inappropriate, that it reportedly led William to bar her from family events involving his children? It all boils down to a single, sharp, and racially charged remark that has opened old wounds and thrust the monarchy back under the unforgiving lens of public scrutiny. Camilla, according to those present, allegedly compared Princess Charlotte, just 9 years old, to Meghan Markle, the estranged Duchess of Sussex, in a way that left no doubt about the insult's intention. She's a mini Meghan, Camilla reportedly said, after a minor disagreement within the family. She's already showing that Markle attitude. This wasn't just a throwaway insult. It wasn't just a poorly chosen metaphor. It was a statement soaked in subtext, dripping with the very prejudice and judgment that Meghan herself has spoken about so openly in the past. It's a comment that echoes with all the weight of royal history, steeped in centuries of expectation, class distinction, and quiet racial undertones. And it didn't go unnoticed. In fact, Prince William's reaction was immediate and furious. According to multiple sources close to the family, William was incandescent when he learned of the comment, not because he's particularly protective of Meghan. Relations between them have been icy, to say the least, but because the target this time wasn't his sister-in-law. It was his daughter. Princess Charlotte, known to the public as a bright and lively child, has always carried herself with a balance of independence and royal poise that many find remarkable for her age. She's a favorite among royal watchers, often stealing the spotlight with a cheeky smile or a gentle wave. But behind that public persona is a little girl navigating the immense pressure of growing up royal. And for William, who has long tried to shield his children from the darkest corners of palace life, Camilla's comment represented an unacceptable crossing of the line. To understand just how deeply this insult cut, we need to step back and look at the dynamics within the royal family, both public and private. Camilla has never been fully embraced by William and Harry. Though she's now queen consort and Charles's devoted wife, she remains a divisive figure. The memory of their mother, Princess Diana, still casts a long shadow over their relationships, especially with William, who has always kept Camilla at arm's length. In public, they smile. They stand beside each other at events. They nod in respect. But behind palace doors, it's a different story. William's respect for Camilla, if it exists at all, has always been tightly measured. And now, with this latest incident, whatever diplomatic détente may have existed between them appears to have shattered entirely. According to palace insiders, William didn't just express disappointment in Camilla. He issued a firm, unambiguous instruction: she is no longer welcome at family gatherings where his children are present. That includes birthdays, holidays, and even casual Sunday lunches. The message was clear: cross this line, and you're out. This isn't the first time the royal family has found itself in the middle of a racial controversy. Meghan Markle's explosive interview with Oprah Winfrey in 2021 reignited a global conversation about race, privilege, and the British monarchy. In that interview, Meghan spoke of unnamed family members expressing concerns about how dark her unborn child's skin might be. While the palace swiftly denied any wrongdoing, the damage was done. A fracture had formed, one that still hasn't healed. Camilla's latest comment, if confirmed, risks pulling the monarchy back into that firestorm. And this time, the damage may be even harder to contain. Because unlike the Meghan saga, this situation involves a direct heir to the throne, his daughter, and a queen consort who was only just beginning to cement her place in the public's good graces. The queen herself, Elizabeth II, often preached the value of never complain, never explain. It was a motto designed to keep the monarchy above the fray of public debate. But that era is gone. In today's hyper-connected world, silence is no longer interpreted as dignity, it's seen as complicity. And William, more than any other royal, seems to understand that. He knows the power of perception. He knows how fast stories can spread, how quickly narratives form, and how damaging even a single misstep can be. That's why his reaction was so immediate, so uncompromising. For William, this isn't just about Charlotte. It's about the future of the monarchy, about setting a new standard, about sending a message not just to Camilla, but to the entire royal establishment that his children are off limits, that the next generation of Windsors will not grow up under the same cloud of quiet prejudice and palace politics that plagued his own childhood. What makes this moment even more explosive is how it exposes the internal fractures that the palace has desperately tried to hide. For years, royal watchers have speculated about the true state of affairs behind those palace walls. Now, with this one comment, the facade has cracked. And what's peeking through is a picture of a family still struggling to come to terms with its own legacy, still wrestling with the ghosts of Diana, the fallout of Meghan, and the looming reality of a modern, multicultural Britain that's watching every move. The stakes are higher than ever. Because this isn't just about family drama. It's about the very survival of the monarchy in the 21st century. If the royal family is to remain relevant, it must reflect the values of the nation it represents. It must rise above old prejudices. It must protect its most vulnerable members, not just physically, but emotionally. And yet, as the dust continues to settle, the question remains, how deep does this rift go? Can Prince William and Queen Camilla ever repair their relationship after such a personal betrayal? Will King Charles be forced to choose between his wife and his son? And what does this mean for the monarchy's already fragile reputation? Only time will tell. But one thing is clear, the line has been drawn. And Prince William, the once reserved heir, has shown he's not afraid to defend his family, not just from the outside world, but from within his own royal circle. Let's now take a deeper look at how this conflict unfolded, what led up to it, what Camilla's exact words were, how the rest of the family responded, and how this singular moment might change the monarchy forever. The final weeks of Queen Elizabeth II's life were marked by a solemn, quiet dignity, one fitting for a monarch whose reign had spanned 70 years and endured the seismic changes of the 20th and 21st centuries. But behind the quiet scenes in Balmoral Castle, where the Queen spent her last summer, royal insiders now say there was a different story unfolding. The kind of story that doesn't make it into official press releases or carefully scripted palace statements. It began with subtle observations. A longtime footman, loyal for decades, noticed the Queen receiving more frequent video calls than usual. A senior member of the household staff became uneasy when these calls, often originating from Montecito, were conducted privately with no aides or equerries present. Then there were the curious changes in the Queen's routine. She would request more time in her study after these conversations, sometimes asking for certain files or correspondence to be brought to her alone. Sources close to the royal household now confirm what many had only speculated. Prince Harry had resumed more consistent contact with the Queen in the final months of her life. On the surface, this might have appeared to be the efforts of a grandson trying to reconnect. But to those who witnessed it firsthand, it seemed strategic, deliberate, even desperate. Multiple aides reported that the tone of the calls grew more intense over time. What began as warm familial exchanges soon turned into serious discussions, with Harry allegedly questioning certain decisions made about titles, trust funds, and inheritances. At this point, palace officials were already on high alert. The Queen's health was fragile, her mobility limited. She was under regular medical supervision, and yet Harry, half a world away and no longer a working royal, had suddenly become a recurring presence in her life again. Not through public appearances or official communications, but through late-night private calls and encrypted messages. It didn't sit right with many of those closest to her. One insider, who asked to remain anonymous but had worked closely with the Queen's legal advisors, described a growing concern among the staff. There was a sense that something was happening behind the scenes that none of us were meant to see. We were being left out of conversations we'd normally be a part of. And the Queen, though still sharp, was also deeply emotional in those final months. By midsummer, these concerns reached Prince William, who was already heavily involved in supporting both his grandmother and the wider royal transition in anticipation of King Charles's ascension. William, known for his calm temperament, did not react immediately. Instead, he began quietly gathering information. Asking for call logs, reviewing visitor records, and speaking directly with those closest to the Queen at Balmoral. What he found alarmed him. There were more than a dozen calls from Prince Harry over a span of 4 weeks, some lasting over an hour. Several of those calls coincided with meetings the Queen had with her private legal counsel. One source described a particular phone call that reportedly ended with the Queen in tears, followed by an abrupt rescheduling of a meeting regarding her estate's provisions. To William, this was more than just a red flag. It was a breach of trust, an encroachment not only on the Queen's emotional vulnerability, but on the sanctity of her final wishes. Quietly, he initiated a private audit of the legal changes being drafted at that time. What emerged was a rough outline of several proposed amendments, none of which were ever finalized, but which, according to sources, bore the fingerprints of outside influence. These proposals included rewording a clause that related to the distribution of personal jewelry, adjusting oversight of a particular trust fund that had long been earmarked for royal charitable causes, and even a note suggesting consideration for the creation of honorary roles for non-working royal descendants, something that would have implicitly included Harry's children. While none of these suggestions made it into the final version of the will, the fact that they were ever floated raised serious questions. How had they entered the legal review process in the first place? Who had suggested them? And was the Queen truly acting of her own volition, or under the emotional pressure of a grandson seeking restitution and relevance? By late August, William's concern had turned into outright suspicion. In a rare move, he requested a direct briefing with the Queen's legal counsel. Though he did not accuse Harry outright, those present during the conversation say his message was clear. Any attempt to alter the Queen's final intentions under external pressure, especially from someone who had publicly distanced himself from royal life, would be viewed as an attack on the crown itself. The Queen, by this time, was becoming visibly more frail. Her final public appearance, where she formally welcomed Prime Minister Liz Truss to Balmoral, would take place just days before her death. Yet internally, the palace was consumed not just with preparing for the inevitable passing of the sovereign, but with managing a growing internal crisis. Even King Charles, then still Prince of Wales, was drawn into the matter. According to insiders, he was briefed on the situation by William and expressed deep dismay over what he viewed as an unnecessary disruption during a delicate transition. Charles, whose own relationship with Harry had become strained following multiple public criticisms and Spare, and the Sussex's Netflix documentary, chose not to intervene directly. But he made it clear that the Queen's will was to be honored in full, without manipulation or interference. When Queen Elizabeth II passed away on September 8, 2022, the world mourned the loss of an icon. But inside the palace, the grief was complicated by tension, suspicion, and what some have since described as a quiet war between brothers. It wasn't until months later, after the funeral, the coronation planning, and the settling of immediate succession duties, that Prince William chose to speak out. In a private meeting with senior royal advisors and select members of the legal team, he laid out what he had learned, connecting the dots between Harry's communications, the attempted legal revisions, and the emotional toll it had taken on the Queen in her final days. William, typically reserved and diplomatic, was reportedly impassioned and unequivocal. He stated plainly that his brother's actions represented a clear overstep, and that moving forward, the integrity of the Queen's legacy must be protected, even if that meant severing personal ties. The fallout was immediate. Within weeks, Prince Harry's access to certain royal estates was formally revoked. Invitations to upcoming royal events were quietly rescinded. And more crucially, discussions began about officially and publicly distancing the Sussexes from core royal functions, particularly those that involved legacy, inheritance, and public symbolism. In private, the Queen's inner circle began referring to Harry as the outsider, a term not used lightly in a family defined by bloodline and heritage. And while no criminal allegations were ever pursued, the ethical line had clearly been crossed. What had once been a cold tension between brothers had now escalated into an open wound within the monarchy. Media speculation swirled, but the palace remained silent. Official statements referred only to a review of internal protocols and the importance of upholding the Queen's legacy. But behind the scenes, sources confirmed that Prince William had taken the lead in drawing a line in the sand, one that left no room for negotiation. It was in this climate of quiet but unmistakable rupture that Harry made one last effort to reclaim his position. In a letter reportedly sent to King Charles and copied to Prince William, he denied any wrongdoing, claiming his conversations with the Queen were deeply personal and rooted in love and reconciliation. He insisted he had made no demands, only shared hopes for the future. But for William, it was too little, too late. The damage had been done, and for the first time, the heir to the throne took the unprecedented step of insisting that a family member be formally cut off from matters of royal estate and succession. From that moment on, Harry was no longer just the prince who stepped away. He became the prince who, in William's eyes, tried to reshape history for personal gain. In the centuries-long tradition of the British monarchy, the last will and testament of a sovereign is a sacred document. It carries not only legal weight but also the symbolic authority of the crown itself. For Queen Elizabeth II, the longest reigning monarch in British history, her final will represented the culmination of a life of duty, precision, and deeply held convictions about the continuity of the royal family. But following her death, the sanctity of that document was soon called into question. And at the heart of the controversy stood Prince Harry, the once beloved younger son who had long since charted a path away from royal obligations. The Queen's will, like those of her predecessors, was shrouded in secrecy. Under a unique royal convention, the wills of senior royals are sealed for 90 years. The public, press, and even some extended members of the royal family are denied access. Yet within the private corridors of Buckingham Palace, Balmoral Castle, and Windsor, the contents of the will were known to a small and elite group: legal advisors, key members of the Privy Council, and of course, the direct heirs. As expected, King Charles III was to inherit the vast majority of the Queen's estate and responsibilities. Prince William, as the Prince of Wales and next in line, was also a significant beneficiary. However, what drew immediate attention, and ultimately controversy, was what the Queen had chosen to do with the personal heirlooms, properties, and symbolic assets under her private ownership. These included not just priceless jewelry collections and personal artifacts, but also parcels of land, royal patronages, and guardianship of traditions that extended well beyond monetary value. Many insiders expected these would be divided thoughtfully among her grandchildren. Instead, the will made clear distinctions, ones that excluded Prince Harry almost entirely. According to sources close to the review team, the Queen had made the conscious decision to leave certain cherished possessions to William and his children, with little to no mention of Harry. Most notably, a beloved brooch worn during key national events, including her coronation anniversary, was designated to Princess Charlotte. An extensive collection of royal letters and diaries were placed in trust, to be curated by William and made available to historians in the future. Even more telling, an ancestral property in Norfolk, rumored to be a personal favorite of the Queen, was quietly left to William as part of her private estate. For Prince Harry, who had grown up in these royal homes and been deeply attached to his grandmother during his formative years, this exclusion was more than a financial slight. It was, in his view, a personal repudiation. And according to sources within Montecito, he was both deeply hurt and furious. What followed was an extraordinary and almost unprecedented move. Harry, through his legal team, made a formal inquiry into the process of the will's drafting, asking whether the Queen had made these decisions freely and without influence. Palace aides were blindsided. Such a request, while not illegal, was seen as a breach of protocol so severe it bordered on betrayal. The Queen had passed away, her wishes legally ratified and in motion, and yet her grandson, already estranged from royal duties, was now effectively questioning her mental state and intent in the final months of her life. It was a move that sent shockwaves through the family and threatened to spark a full-scale legal war. Behind closed doors, discussions turned heated. King Charles, already overwhelmed with the responsibilities of ascending the throne and preparing for his coronation, was reportedly incensed. According to a senior courtier, Charles considered Harry's inquiry a direct challenge to the Queen's memory and dignity. For Charles, this was not just about inheritance, it was about loyalty, timing, and preserving the monarchy's image. Prince William, on the other hand, had already been monitoring his brother's behavior, He viewed this challenge not as a moment of grief-fueled confusion but as a calculated move. In a confidential meeting with senior advisors, William reportedly said, "This isn't about what was left or not left. It's about rewriting the final chapter of her reign." To understand how the Queen had arrived at such decisive decisions regarding her estate, we must look back at the turbulent years leading to her passing. The rift between the Sussexes and the rest of the royal family had grown rapidly after the explosive Oprah interview in 2021. The Queen, though always composed in public, was privately described as deeply distressed by the claims of racism and cruelty made during that broadcast. Even more troubling to her, insiders say, was Harry's repeated questioning of the institution that had shaped and defined his life. In the Queen's eyes, the monarchy was not a matter of preference or lifestyle, it was a sacred duty. And while she harbored love for all her grandchildren, she reportedly told one close friend that duty must come before affection when the crown is at stake. It was this guiding belief that influenced the language and structure of her will. She was determined to protect the monarchy's future from potential destabilization, leaving assets, whether symbolic or tangible, to Harry. A man who had criticized the family in public could potentially be used in memoirs, documentaries, or lawsuits. It was not just about preserving wealth. It was about ensuring legacy, shielding royal heritage from being reframed or misinterpreted by a prince who had walked away. Still, the decision to exclude Harry was not made lightly. According to legal sources, the Queen consulted with her trusted counsel and advisors multiple times in her final year, ensuring that her choices were legally sound and emotionally considered. Her final meetings on the matter occurred in the summer of 2022, just weeks before her passing, and were documented in detail. Notes, voice recordings, and signed addendums ensured that her state of mind and intentions were clear. Yet, Harry's challenge threatened to undo this careful work. His legal team requested access to some of these records under the guise of due diligence, but the palace refused, citing both tradition and legal confidentiality. What ensued was a quiet but fierce legal battle, one that never made it to public court but played out behind the scenes through royal solicitors and high-powered legal firms. At one point, mediation was proposed. King Charles rejected it outright. In his view, allowing Harry to question the Queen's will, even in private, would set a dangerous precedent. If her final wishes could be second-guessed by family members out of favor, then no monarch's legacy would ever be secure again. Prince William agreed. In a rare show of unity with his father, William supported a full denial of Harry's request and insisted the palace release an internal statement affirming the Queen's full mental capacity in the final year of her life. The damage, however, had already been done. The brothers, once inseparable, had now entered uncharted territory. It was no longer a question of reconciliation, but of containment. Trust had evaporated. Communication ceased altogether. Back in California, the Sussex camp weighed its next move. Some close to Harry advised him to let the matter rest. The will had been settled, the statements made, and further challenge would only deepen public perception of his distance from the family. Meghan Markle, according to insiders, was reportedly in favor of moving on. She believed the ongoing feud was taking a toll on both their image and emotional well-being. But Harry felt differently. He believed there were truths left untold, intentions misunderstood. His frustration wasn't just about exclusion, it was about narrative. For so long, he had felt misunderstood, reduced to tabloid caricatures and filtered through palace briefings. The will, in his view, was the final act in a long campaign to silence his voice within the institution. Still, the legal reality was firm. The Queen's will had been validated, documented, and filed under royal tradition. Unless a formal criminal charge of coercion or mental incapacity could be proven, an extraordinarily high legal bar, there would be no changes. As 2023 unfolded, the palace began laying the groundwork for a broader communication strategy. Rather than publicly condemning Harry, they chose to focus on legacy. Carefully crafted documentaries, public displays of the Queen's favorite artifacts, and new educational programs about her reign were all initiated. Prince William, now bearing a growing share of royal responsibilities, took the lead in promoting these efforts. Each public appearance, each tribute, was a reminder of continuity, of tradition upheld. And through it all, Harry remained distant, geographically, emotionally, and now legally. The will had been read. The battle had been waged. And though no courtroom drama ever unfolded, the lines had been drawn as starkly as if a gavel had fallen. The silence that had temporarily settled over the royal family following Prince Harry's challenge to Queen Elizabeth's will was short-lived. In a stunning escalation that reverberated through legal and royal circles alike, Prince Harry filed a formal lawsuit against the executors of the Queen's estate, demanding $10 million he believed he was entitled to from her personal inheritance. The lawsuit, filed quietly in a London court but immediately leaked to media outlets on both sides of the Atlantic, marked a new and aggressive chapter in the deepening rift between Harry and the rest of the royal family. At its heart, the case hinged on Harry's belief that he had been unjustly excluded from receiving a fair portion of his grandmother's private fortune, an estate estimated to be worth over $500 million, including art, jewelry, private properties, and vast investment portfolios. While the bulk of the estate was formally transferred to King Charles III, and substantial portions designated to Prince William and his children, Harry received no direct financial bequest in the official documents reviewed by legal intermediaries. The $10 million figure wasn't arbitrary. According to Harry's legal team, it represented a combination of lost assets, personal gifts, shared heirlooms, and implied bequests that had been previously discussed with the Queen. They alleged that there had been conversations between Harry and his grandmother in private over the years, moments in which she had supposedly reassured him that he would always have a piece of her legacy, regardless of where his path took him. The lawsuit framed these moments as evidence of verbal testamentary intent, a legal gray area but not unheard of in inheritance cases. What made the case extraordinary, however, wasn't just the monetary demand. It was the decision to bring the matter to court at all. Traditionally, royal disputes are resolved quietly, through internal negotiation and discreet arbitration. For a senior royal, let alone the Queen's grandson, to sue the estate of a monarch was virtually unprecedented. The move stunned even the most seasoned royal commentators. Within days, the British press was ablaze with headlines. Harry sues the crown, Queen's legacy in courtroom crossfire, and palace prepares for legal war. Opinion pieces ran the gamut from sympathetic to scathing. Some argued that Harry was only seeking what he felt was promised to him. Others accused him of greed and opportunism, framing the lawsuit as a betrayal of not only his family but also the Queen's memory. Behind palace walls, the atmosphere turned tense and reactive. King Charles was reportedly beside himself, viewing the lawsuit as the ultimate insult. According to sources close to the monarch, he had maintained a faint hope that despite the rifts and public fallout, some part of the bond between Harry and the family remained intact. But the legal challenge destroyed that illusion. To understand how the Queen's estate was handled, one must look at the structure of royal wealth. The sovereign's private estate is separate from the crown estate, which is held in trust for the nation. The Queen's personal wealth included assets inherited from her father King George VI, personal investments, and private residences such as Balmoral and Sandringham. While Balmoral remained tied to the reigning monarch, Sandringham was part of the Queen's private holdings and was passed directly to King Charles. The jewelry collection posed another complication. While the crown jewels are state property, the Queen possessed a private collection of brooches, tiaras, rings, and necklaces, many of which held historical and emotional significance. According to inside reports, nearly the entirety of this private collection was willed to Queen Camilla and Catherine, Princess of Wales. This included the famed Greville emerald tiara and the diamond necklace worn by the Queen during her silver jubilee. Harry's claim specifically referenced a piece of jewelry, a diamond-studded Cartier bracelet he had given the Queen as a young boy, which had since disappeared from any public record. He believed it was a personal gift that should have been returned to him or passed down to his children. The palace, however, maintained that the bracelet was absorbed into the Queen's private collection and passed on according to her wishes. As legal teams from both sides prepared for a potential hearing, the judge overseeing preliminary matters urged the parties to settle quietly. But neither appeared willing to budge. Harry's legal counsel argued that his exclusion from the will could only be understood in light of a pattern of institutional hostility, implying that his marriage to Meghan Markle and departure from royal duties had influenced the Queen's decisions under duress. This was the most controversial element of the case. It directly challenged the narrative that the Queen had acted independently and without coercion. Palace attorneys responded with vigor. In a strongly worded rebuttal, they called the allegations baseless, unprovable, and injurious to the integrity of the Queen's memory. They submitted documentation, notes, correspondence, and legal declarations, affirming that the Queen had updated her will multiple times with full legal oversight and was of sound mind throughout. A psychological evaluation conducted 6 months before her death was also included, confirming her mental fitness. For the court to rule in Harry's favor, he would need to establish that the Queen was either under undue influence or mentally unfit when she revised her will, an extremely high burden of proof. Alternatively, he would have to present compelling evidence that the Queen had made a binding verbal promise to him regarding inheritance, one that could be interpreted as a legal commitment. The problem was that none of these conversations had been recorded or witnessed. They were, by Harry's own admission, moments shared between a grandson and his grandmother in private settings, often without anyone else present. While emotionally powerful, they lacked legal weight. The lawsuit also posed risks for Harry beyond the courtroom. Legal analysts warned that if the case proceeded, it could result in the disclosure of internal royal documents, including private letters, estate records, and potentially embarrassing communications. The palace made it clear it would not hesitate to defend the Queen's wishes with every means at its disposal, including counterclaims and subpoenas if necessary. Public reaction began to turn against Harry. While initial sympathy was present in some media circles, particularly in the United States, a growing number of commentators began to question the wisdom of suing over a personal inheritance. Some noted that Harry and Meghan had signed multi-million-dollar deals with major media platforms and lived in a lavish Montecito estate. The image of a prince demanding $10 million from his grandmothers will clash with the narrative of someone seeking privacy and independence. Within royal circles, the lawsuit became a cautionary tale. Advisors to King Charles began drafting new succession protocols to prevent similar challenges in the future. Prince William reportedly initiated conversations with legal advisors to ensure that his own estate would be protected from reinterpretation or legal challenge once he became king. The incident revealed a vulnerability in the monarchy's structure, one that had not been tested in such a public and emotionally fraught way before. As the weeks dragged on, and the case showed no signs of quiet resolution, murmurs of settlement began to circulate. Behind the scenes, intermediaries from both sides began laying the groundwork for a confidential agreement. According to those familiar with the talks, the palace offered Harry a modest financial settlement, far below his original $10 million demand. In exchange for a full withdrawal of the lawsuit and a signed agreement never to publicly disclose the Queen's final will or related internal documents. It was a bitter pill for Harry to swallow. Accepting would mean conceding that his grandmother's legacy would remain as written. Rejecting it would risk a public courtroom defeat that could tarnish his public image further. Ultimately, after intense deliberation and under pressure from both legal counsel and senior members of his inner circle, Harry agreed to the terms. The lawsuit was withdrawn in a closed-door session. No official statement was made by either side. The court sealed the case records under privacy provisions, and the British media, under informal palace guidance, scaled back its coverage. Yet, the damage lingered. The attempt to challenge the Queen's final wishes had left an indelible mark on Harry's relationship with his family. King Charles reportedly instructed palace aides to cease all efforts at reconciliation. Prince William, once considered the bridge between his brother and the crown, became more resolute in protecting the institution from further challenges. Trust, already eroded, was now extinguished. For Harry, the episode was a sobering lesson in the limits of legacy. He had believed his relationship with his grandmother transcended the confines of palace life. But in the end, tradition, protocol, and the preservation of the monarchy proved more enduring than personal memory. The Queen's will had stood, unbroken, unchallenged, and final. In the wake of Prince Harry's failed $10 million lawsuit against the estate of Queen Elizabeth II, the British monarchy entered an era of quiet but undeniable transformation. While the lawsuit itself had been discreetly withdrawn under a sealed agreement, the damage it caused radiated through every corner of royal life. No longer could disputes within the royal family be seen as mere familial disagreements. They were now potential constitutional flashpoints. The lawsuit had done more than shake the family's private foundations. It had placed the monarchy under a legal and moral microscope for the world to examine. In a monarchy built on heritage and ceremonial continuity, any sign of internal discord is cause for concern. Harry's legal challenge not only questioned the integrity of Queen Elizabeth's will but implicitly cast a shadow over the entire apparatus that had supported her during her reign. With public trust already fragile in a rapidly modernizing Britain, the image of a prince demanding millions from a monarch's private fortune caused some to revisit deeper questions about the monarchy's role and relevance. Internally, Buckingham Palace wasted no time initiating damage control. King Charles III, already burdened with a long list of reform priorities, took urgent steps to shield the institution from similar threats in the future. He convened his most trusted advisors, including legal experts, royal historians, and senior members of the Privy Council, to assess the long-term implications of the legal ordeal. Their findings led to the creation of a new royal estate governance framework, one that placed stricter protocols on inheritance processes, including the use of confidential trust structures, digital will authentication, and succession-proof allocations for future monarchs. One of the key changes involved how private assets of reigning monarchs would be handled in the future. Where Queen Elizabeth had relied heavily on handwritten revisions and oral conversations, some of which Harry's lawyers tried to exploit, King Charles insisted on digital trailback decisions for every adjustment to personal holdings. Every piece of jewelry, every estate painting, every heirloom was now to be catalogued with a permanent record of intent, witnessed and notarized, and backed by legal justification. The palace's legal office grew overnight, turning into a quasi-family trust unit with a modern legal strategy at its core. Beyond the legal mechanisms, the royal family also re-evaluated their communications policies. The idea that private conversations, once assumed safe and sacrosanct, could be interpreted as legal promises sent shockwaves throughout the House of Windsor. Staff were trained to avoid any suggestive language that might be construed as binding. Royals were discouraged from discussing wealth or inheritance with one another in private settings. Everything had to be official or nothing at all. These shifts were not just practical, they were symbolic. They revealed a monarchy in self-protective mode, scrambling to armor itself against the very thing it had never anticipated: betrayal from within. Harry's decision to challenge the Queen's final wishes had opened a door that could never be fully closed again. It set a precedent, however muted by the withdrawal of the suit, that personal grievances could be aired in court, that private hurts could become public litigation. Yet perhaps the most profound effect of the lawsuit was the psychological one. Within the family, a new culture of mistrust took root. King Charles, once regarded as an emotionally open figure who had tried, at least nominally, to bridge the divide with Harry, now began to adopt a tone of formality even in private dealings. Palace insiders reported that Charles rarely mentioned Harry anymore, except when dealing with estate matters or media queries. Any sentiment of paternal sorrow had, it seemed, been replaced with institutional coldness. Prince William, meanwhile, took an even firmer stance. Having already endured years of indirect attacks from Harry and Meghan through interviews, memoirs, and public appearances, the lawsuit felt like the final betrayal. For William, this was no longer a disagreement. It was a calculated strike against the very fabric of their shared legacy. His response was not theatrical, but it was decisive. He began severing all remaining collaborative efforts that had once been envisioned as shared charitable ventures or joint royal patronages with Harry. One of the clearest indications of this shift came in the form of a restructuring of the Royal Foundation. Originally established as a joint initiative between William, Catherine, Harry, and Meghan, it had since evolved into a solo endeavor by the Prince and Princess of Wales. Following the lawsuit, William directed the Foundation's board to formally remove all historical branding associated with the Sussexes, ensuring there was no lingering public association between the initiatives he continued to champion and the relatives who had now been fully exiled from royal favor. The fallout also had diplomatic consequences. With the lawsuit becoming international news, foreign governments began to approach the British monarchy with more caution. For countries in the Commonwealth, especially those already exploring paths to republicanism, Harry's court challenge raised uncomfortable questions about the British royal family's moral authority. If a grandson could publicly question the final decisions of a monarch regarded globally as a symbol of stability, what did that say about the institution's unity? The Commonwealth's youth leaders in countries like Australia, Jamaica, and Canada began hosting forums discussing constitutional independence in the wake of the lawsuit. Though not directly spurred by the court case, the timing made it easier for critics to question the family's legitimacy in the modern era. In some quarters, the perception was that the monarchy had become not just outdated but fractured, unable to resolve its internal crises without legal intervention. Meanwhile, in America, where Harry and Meghan had relocated and built their new brand, the lawsuit also backfired. Initially, there was a surge of support from the couple's core base, those who had sympathized with their accounts of emotional turmoil and family neglect. But as court documents surfaced and media analysts dissected the timing and tone of the legal complaint, skepticism grew. Even fans who had once cheered the couple's move to California began to wonder if the lawsuit marked a bridge too far. Hollywood, which had embraced the Sussexes with open arms, suddenly grew more reserved. Industry insiders revealed that a number of speaking engagements and deals were quietly shelved or postponed. Corporate sponsors feared being caught in the middle of a family scandal that now looked more like a financial squabble than a moral crusade. The couple's Netflix deal, one of the crown jewels of their post-royal ventures, faced renewed scrutiny. Internal analytics reportedly showed a dip in engagement following the lawsuit announcement. Where their earlier documentary drew tens of millions of viewers eager to learn about their departure from royal life, new projects struggled to achieve similar resonance. The public's appetite for drama had reached saturation point, and the lawsuit seemed to blur the line between justified rebellion and opportunistic litigation. Behind the scenes, Meghan was said to be privately alarmed by the public reaction. Though she had stood by Harry during the lawsuit, reports suggested that the couple began facing internal tensions as the fallout intensified. Advisors close to the Sussexes allegedly urged them to pivot away from royal-related content entirely and instead focus on humanitarian or non-political ventures. The brand that had once been powered by speaking their truth now needed recalibration to remain viable. For Harry, the aftermath was deeply isolating. He had bet everything, his name, his credibility, and a significant part of his remaining familial capital, on the idea that the lawsuit would force a reckoning or at least provide him with the acknowledgement he had craved. Instead, he found himself more alienated than ever, shut out not just from royal privilege, but from the emotional bonds that once tethered him to his heritage. Even his relationship with Princess Anne, who had once maintained a quiet alliance with her nephew despite the chaos, became strained. And, known for her stoicism and loyalty to the institution, reportedly felt betrayed by the public airing of family matters in court. For a woman who had watched her mother navigate decades of political and social upheaval with grace, the idea of her nephew suing the Queen's estate was not just inappropriate, it was, in her view, sacrilege. In this new chapter of royal history, trust was the rarest currency. What had once been a family defined by shared duty and public sacrifice now resembled a complex web of contracts, legal protections, and public relations strategies. And at the heart of it all was a man who had once been seen as the monarchy's most relatable figure. A prince of the people, a soldier, a son. Now, he was a litigant, a critic, and for many, a cautionary tale. The lawsuit may have been withdrawn, the legal fire extinguished, but the scorched earth it left behind was undeniable. It altered royal policy, weakened public confidence, and permanently changed the way the family conducted its internal affairs. No longer could disagreements be resolved with a handshake or a quiet family meeting. Everything was now a potential headline, a potential scandal, a potential lawsuit. As King Charles continued with his reign, he did so under a cloud of emotional weight, a sovereign tasked with leading not just a nation, but a family that had been broken in ways no coronation speech or public appearance could fully repair. And as for Prince Harry, he now stood outside the gates of Buckingham Palace in more ways than one. A royal by blood but a stranger by consequence, marked not by the legacy he sought to claim but by the one he chose to challenge. When Prince Harry's $10 million lawsuit against Queen Elizabeth II's estate became public knowledge, it ignited a firestorm unlike anything the monarchy had seen in the modern media era. What began as a legal maneuver intended, at least from Harry's perspective, to assert fairness and personal justice rapidly evolved into a cultural moment. Around the globe, citizens, pundits, and power players weighed in, not just on the specifics of the lawsuit, but on what it symbolized for the British monarchy, for family dynamics and public life, and for the ever-blurring lines between private royalty and public spectacle. News first broke in a quiet yet unmistakable headline that appeared on a major British tabloid's website in the early hours of a Wednesday morning. The initial report hinted at sealed court documents and unnamed legal proceedings involving a senior royal figure. Within hours, online speculation reached a fever pitch. Royal watchers and legal analysts began connecting the dots, citing earlier interviews and public appearances in which Harry had spoken vaguely about feeling shut out or erased following the Queen's death. By noon, an explosive leak revealed the truth. Prince Harry had initiated legal action, seeking $10 million from the late Queen's private estate, citing oral promises and disputed understandings about his inheritance. The response from the British media was swift and brutal. Tabloids, already hostile toward the Sussexes since their departure from royal duties, pounced with sensational headlines and biting op-eds. Front pages across the United Kingdom branded Harry as the greedy prince, the betrayer, and the heir who sued the crown. Newspapers ran side-by-side images of Harry walking behind his grandmother's coffin next to stark court filings in which he contested her posthumous decisions. Even more sobering were the reaction pieces from traditionally moderate and pro-monarchy outlets like The Times and The Telegraph, which typically refrained from emotional language in royal coverage. In this case, however, their tone was unmistakably critical. Columnists argued that the lawsuit represented a dangerous breach of precedent. One writer observed that what once was a family bound by service and stoicism has become a courtroom battleground, its integrity litigated in open court. Public reaction was deeply divided. For some, especially among the younger and more progressive demographic in the UK and abroad, Harry's lawsuit was framed as an act of justice against the antiquated systems of privilege and unspoken arrangements that had long governed royal life. Hashtags such as #JusticeForHarry and #RoyalInheritance trended on social media platforms like X, formerly Twitter, and Instagram. Influencers and activists weighed in, defending Harry's right to stand up for what he believed had been denied him. On the other hand, the backlash was intense and personal. Older Britons, particularly those who had revered Queen Elizabeth II for decades, saw the lawsuit as a shocking act of betrayal. Phone-in shows and radio programs were inundated with calls from furious citizens, many of whom expressed their horror at what they perceived to be Harry suing his own grandmother's memory. One woman told a BBC presenter, "The Queen gave everything to her country, and now her grandson wants to take more from her in death? It's shameful." The lawsuit also created fractures within the Royalist and Republican camps. For staunch Royalists, the action reinforced fears that the monarchy was under siege not just from outside forces, but from within. Royal correspondents who had covered the family for decades admitted they had never seen such a publicly disruptive move. On the flip side, for Republicans, those in the UK and Commonwealth who sought to abolish the monarchy, the lawsuit was seen as a potent example of why the institution was outdated. They argued that if even the Queen's own grandson was disillusioned with the system, perhaps it was time for the public to follow suit. Internationally, media coverage was equally volatile. In the United States, networks like CNN and MSNBC covered the story with cautious interest, focusing on the legal implications and what it revealed about wealth distribution within one of the world's most famous families. More entertainment-focused outlets such as TMZ, People, and E! News leaned into the drama, providing wall-to-wall coverage of Harry and Meghan's public appearances, body language, and any subtle gesture that might indicate their reaction to the public fallout. Fox News, meanwhile, framed the story within a broader narrative of celebrity entitlement and generational conflict. Conservative pundits mocked Harry's position, suggesting he was weaponizing victimhood in an attempt to profit off the royal family's legacy while claiming to reject its values. British expats in America wrote op-eds expressing their discomfort with Harry's actions, arguing that while they supported his right to speak his truth, taking legal action against the Queen's estate crossed a line of basic decency. The Sussexes media team, typically swift to offer clarifications or statements, maintained a strategic silence in the lawsuit's early days. This vacuum of information only fueled speculation. Why had Harry chosen this path? What was the nature of the alleged promises? Had the Queen truly intended to provide him with a specific sum, or was Harry trying to reconstruct verbal assurances into legal claims? Eventually, through an authorized interview with a well-known journalist who had previously covered the Sussexes sympathetically, a clearer picture began to emerge. The article, published in a prominent U.S. magazine, included unnamed sources close to Harry who suggested that he had acted out of emotional injury rather than greed. They claimed that during the Queen's final months, there had been several deeply personal conversations between Harry and Elizabeth, wherein she had expressed regret for how he had been treated and had indicated her intent to support him privately. These sources insisted that Harry had not initially planned to pursue legal action, but was pushed to do so after discovering he had been left out of certain trust arrangements and endowments given to other grandchildren. The interview was careful in its wording but suggested that Harry believed some members of the family had intervened to block or alter the Queen's final wishes regarding him. While this account drew some sympathy, it did little to soften the overall backlash. One area where the media frenzy reached a fever pitch was in speculation over Meghan Markle's role in the lawsuit. Though her name was absent from the court documents, commentators insisted on analyzing every word, gesture, and photograph of her during the period surrounding the filing. Some accused her of masterminding the suit.